Hi, welcome, and Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
It goes with the screen share. And we'll get started here. Okay. So, this is, of course, Isaac and Jacob about to take the blessing away from Esau. And at this point, he has presented himself to his father and claimed that he is Esau. Okay. Vayomer, and this is Isaac saying, Hagishali, come over to me, draw near to me, va'ochla mitzei b'ni, so that I can eat of the game of my son. Lema tevarechacha nafshi, so that I bless you. Vayageshlo, so he went over to him. Vayochal, and he ate. Vayavelo yayin, vayesh, and he brought him wine, and he drank. No Rashi on that. Vayomer elav Yitzchak aviv, and Isaac, his father, said to him, Geshana, again, draw near to me, ushakali b'ni, and kiss me, my son. Vayigash, so he went over. Vayishaklo, and he kissed him. Vayarach et reach begadav, and he inhaled the scent of his clothing. Vayavarachehu, and he blessed him. Vayomer, and he said, Re'eh reach b'ni, look at the scent of the fragrance of my son. The reach sadeh, it's like the scent of a field, or the fragrance of a field. Asher beracho Hashem, which Hashem has blessed. Rashi, vayarach l'gomer, he inhaled, etc. V'halo ein reach ra yoter mishetef ha'izim. He says, there is no worse odor than the smell of goats, right? Ella. So what does this teach? Remember, he had goat skins on his arms and around the nape of his neck. But what this teaches you, shenichnasa imo reach kanen, that what went in with him, or and whether this means that it says with him, right? Reach gan Eden, the fragrance of the Garden of Eden. Interesting statements here from a literary point of view, right? I mean, this whole little piece is just fraught with ambivalence and ambiguity, and so Kerech sadeh asher beracho Hashem, right? Like the fragrance of a field which the Lord has blessed. Shinatan bo reach tov, okay, that he gave within him a good fragrance. V'zeh shad sadeh tapuchim, and that is a field of apple trees. Kein darshu razal. Rashi says that's what our sages of blessed memory interpreted, how they interpreted this. And I feel that there's a lot of symbolism going on here, whether the whole idea of fragrance and the incense offerings, and the fact that we know that, that our sense of smell lies deeply, deeply within the brain, and that it can affect our emotions very deeply. And the business of, the point that Rashi makes about the smell of goats, right? Or their, I don't know if it's their urine or whatever, or whether it's just general smell of goats, and how that was turned into something very, very fragrant, like the fragrance of the Garden of Eden, the idea of the apple trees, that is not the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's nothing in Jewish tradition that suggests that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was an apple tree. That's, if anything, it's compared to a fig tree, at any rate. But apples do play a part. And sometimes the word tapuach is a word that is used for the very center of a fire, right, or of a grate where the fire is taking place. So, is it describing emotions? Is it describing fervor? I'm not sure. This still leaves me with a lot to think about. Vayiten lecha. So this is Isaac telling him, this is the blessing. Vayiten lecha Elohim, and may the God give you, provide for you, mital hashamayim, from the dew of heaven, umishmanei haaretz, and from the fat of the earth, verov dagan, and much corn, v'tirosh, and tirosh is basically grape juice, right? So whether Dagan represents basic sustenance and Tirosh represents joy and pleasure, so a combination of what is necessary and what is enjoyable. So just a thought as to what these symbolize. Vayiten lecha, may he give to you. Yiten v'yachazor v'yiten. So it doesn't say yiten. It says veyitain, which means and may he give you. So the idea is that may he give you, and may he give you again. The idea is that it's an ongoing blessing. Ulefi pshuto, and on the basic literal interpretation of it, musav le'inyan harishon. This is simply a connection of this sentence to the first sentence he made. Re'eh reach benik. Okay, see the fragrance of my son. Shenatan lo hakadosh baruch hu, that the Holy One, blessed be He, gave to him. Karech sadeh, that it was like the fragrance of a field, etc. Ve'od yiten lecha, and may He additionally give to you mital hashamayim, from the dew of heaven, etc. Mital hashamayim, from the dew of heaven. Kamashma'u, he says, one interpretation for sure, or the basic literal interpretation is just as it sounds. In other words, that there should be always enough rain, or certainly dew, which would mean moisture, not so much rain perhaps, but more moisture, right, to make sure that the fields don't die and don't dry up. Midrash Agada yesh laharbe panim. But an agadic, right, a metaphoric understanding of this. There are many elements to this. Harbe panim. There are many ways to understand this metaphorically. Davar acher, another interpretation. Mahu ha-Elohim badin, right? So what do we mean when it says ha-Elohim, which is not Hashem, right? And we know that Elohim is associated with judgment and justice, quid pro quo, right? But badin, imra oilacha, if you are worthy of this, yiten lecha, he will give it to you. V'im love, but if you're not worthy of it, lo yiten lecha, he will not give it to you. So interesting, right? This is not unconditional, that it is conditional. And I've honestly felt that the idea is that nobility is earning your blessings and not just wanting a handout. And in a sense, that's exactly what Isaac is telling Jacob, going on. Aval Esav, but to Esau, Amar, he said, Mishmane haaretz yeh moshavcha. So whether this could be interpreted in two different ways, okay? He simply, I think the way, sometimes mishmana means from the fat of the earth, meaning away from the fat of the earth. But I believe Rashi is understanding it here as a positive saying, from the fat of the earth. Yeh moshavcha will be your habitation. Bein tzaddik, whether he is righteous, bein rasha, whether he is wicked, yiten lecha, right? He will give to you. So again, very important point that earning your blessings is, again, as I said, a foundation of nobility. Umimenu lamed Shlomo, and Solomon learned from this, Keshe'asa habayit sider tfilato, when he created the temple, he arranged his prayer. Yisrael, that when it comes to the Jewish people, Israel, Shehu Bal Emunah, because Israel are people of faith, they have faithfulness, Umatzdik alav hadin, and this is such an important point here. Matzdik alav hadin means that when we face negative situations, when we face adversity, we try to find ways in which we look at ourselves and say, in what way perhaps did I deserve this? In other words, saying, God is the true judge, and you know that the blessing for when you get bad news is Dayan Haemet, the true judge. In other words, this is a very simple and profound act of faith, is to see one's adversity as being deserved. And that is part of loving God. And that's what he's talking about here. Lo yikare alecha. Okay, so let me make sure I understand what this is. Okay. Taged, forgive me. I am looking. Oh, tagar, sorry. Okay. In other words, lo yikra alecha tagar, you won't complain. That's a phrase, that's an idiom that means that. In other words, since the Jewish people, a characteristic of them is that they accept God's judgment when they face adversity, and they won't complain. Lefichach, for this reason, and here's a reference to the first book of Kings, chapter 9, V'natata leish kidrachav. So in Solomon's prayer, when he dedicates the temple, he says, and you shall provide for a man according to his ways, according to his behavior, asher teda et levavo, in that you know his heart. God knows a person's heart. Aval nochri mechusar emunah. So, okay, he says a stranger, a non-Jew, lacks a willingness to do this. I'm not saying that I love reading this kind of stuff, because I feel that it's not a fair judgment to cut to sort of make the dividing line between Jew and non-Jew, unless you say that a person who has faith and who is willing to accept adversity is, in a sense, a member, in a broad sense, of the Jewish people. In other words, unless you choose to flip the definition, because certainly there are Jewish people who lack faith, and there are certainly many non-Jewish people who have deep faith, and one can define it in this particular way. The fichach, at any rate, because at least following this particular line, just to explain it, for this reason, Amar, he said, Solomon said, Va'ata tishma hashamayim v'gomer, and you, they will listen from the heavens, etc. Va'asita kachol asher ikra elecha, and you shall do everything which he calls to you, Hanochri, the non-Israelite. Bein ra'ui, whether he deserves it, bein she'eino ra'ui, or whether he doesn't deserve it. In other words, whenever, hold on one second, David, I'll catch your question. Thank you. That whenever a Jewish person calls out to God, God will answer that Jewish person according to his merits or demerits. But when it comes to a non-Jewish person, God will answer regardless of whether he deserves it or not. Okay? She'enoi ra'ui, tein lo kedei shelo yikra elecha. give it to him so that he doesn't complain about you. He doesn't make a complaint. Rashi Yashan Meduyak. And he says in an earlier text or an old text of Rashi, and Meduyak means it's carefully copied, something like that. It's careful. David, go for it.
Yeah, so there two questions, and if either one of them is going to take too long, just say so. So the first question is, you talked about earlier about earning your blessings, and but basically in this case, Jacob got his through deceit. So that kind of raises a question about that point. So how can we rationalize those two statements? And then the second question is, which I'm sure has been answered before, is the whole point about looking, when something bad happens, we look at ourselves to as to how we participated in that, but also there or caused it or were involved in it. But in reality, we know that bad things do happen to good people, and so how do we rationalize that as well? So those are my two questions.
Okay. So there are two somewhat different questions. I'll
Yeah.
try the first question, which is, I think what you're actually bringing out is what actually plays itself out in Jacob's life. That, here he gets these great blessings from Isaac, but when you actually look at his life, as we read in the subsequent biblical story, right, he actually goes through a great deal of pain and challenges and tragedy. So in a way, it validates what's being said here, that to become a righteous person, and I think perhaps this is a great lesson on the part of the Torah, is you're not necessarily born a righteous person, and you in fact may make a lot of mistakes in the course of your life, but you can turn it around, and if you're willing to accept divine judgment and work it out, that you actually can wind up being a very righteous person. That possibility is out there. And I think that it actually is a beautiful, being very precise about about the blessing that Jacob receives. Okay. So the second point. So you said, you said bad things happen to good people. So I would say that is not necessarily a Jewish perspective. Okay. In fact, there's a line which in the Birkat Hamazon, in the grace after meals, that some people intentionally leave out, and it says, "I never saw a righteous person that his seed were lacking for bread," okay, which is an actual, it's a categorical denial of bad things happen to good people, and in fact, there's a beautiful statement saying that the reason why bad things happen to good people is because life doesn't end here, but that it actually becomes a way in which for us to do tshuva. And Maimonides has a section of his code talked about Hilchot Tshuva, and he actually talks about categories of sin, some of which are very easy to find forgiveness. It's just a matter of basically saying you're sorry. But there are other categories of sin that are much more difficult, and some of which, Maimonides says, come about through tribulation, that the tshuva comes through tribulation. I can only, speak for myself and say that I feel like I've had an incredibly blessed life, and that the tribulations that I've had to face are of little consequence compared to tribulations of others. So it's easy for me to look at those tribulations that I have and say, they're coming to help me grow and hopefully pay, quote, quote, for sins that I have committed. But every person has to do it for themselves, and every person can only judge their own lives. And so I believe that the Bible also tells me to be nothing but sympathetic, right, and empathetic to those who are encountering adversity. But like I said, I can only speak for myself. Yes, Lauren, and I see someone else raise their hands.
No, David is still, yeah.
Okay.
Um, I just, the line that you quoted from benching, I assume it does not have to be taken as physical food, but it can
Yes.
refer to some kind of spiritual or religious nourishment.
Yeah, it could be, Lauren. That's a good way to, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think that's a beautiful way in which to understand it and see it as a truthful statement. That's very, I like that a lot. Yeah.
Because, I mean, and I know it kind of encompasses what you already said about that it's referring to the next life, but I mean, I just want to make sure it's not saying that if you're a starving person in a country without resources, that means you're a bad person.
Right. Right. You never want to say that. That's the Job's comforter position, right? Because his comforters come to Job and tell him, well, maybe you did this and maybe you did that, etc. And clearly the book of Job is saying that is inappropriate. You don't judge others by that. Right. I agree. It's like saying, that people who are poor somehow deserved it. That's awful. You know that the Torah, it really wants to make sure that social welfare is very much a foundation of the state, you know, of our way of life, providing for the poor and those who are underprivileged. Yes. Good point. David, did you want to follow up on anything?
Yeah, I think the Lord, I think you just brought that up because in the previous statement, I was it also, the cases of things like, children being murdered,
Yeah.
that are innocent, I mean, they don't, they can't look back, or you can't look back on something that they've done, especially if they're not, if they're babies. I mean, that doesn't, it doesn't ring, you know what I mean? So there has to be, yeah. I guess
Oh,
we have a distinction between those cases, right? Or yeah,
oh, I mean,
that's
birth defects. I mean,
yep,
come on, right? What did
yep,
that person do, possibly to deserve that? We
yeah,
just don't act that way. What we do is we try to acknowledge God's kindness and righteousness, and that it's beyond our full understanding, and that we're being called on to show compassion and love, and even people with birth defects can experience love and compassion and still, be happy with their lives to some extent. It's absolutely possible. But there is suffering, and we have to put our hearts out to anyone who's suffering, and not say, which some people do say, as Lauren was bringing out, that somehow they must have done something wrong to deserve the suffering. It's not. It's a very personal point of view, and if you notice how Rashi put it, he put it on a personal kind of level, right? Whether we are going to complain about God, or not ourselves. Okay. Let's see if we want to do any more. We're almost out of time. Let me see where we are. Okay. Yeah, but it was a little bit more here. Back up here. Ya'avducha amim, right? Nations will serve you. Vayishtachavu lecha leumim. And again, leumim, nations, amim, peoples will serve you, and nations will prostrate themselves to you or bow down to you. Heve gvir la'achecha. May you. I'm trying to think of how to translate, but basically it means mastery. Let's say you will be master over your brother, right? Brothers, and the sons of your mother will bow down to you. Orerecha arur, those who curse you will be cursed. Umevarachecha baruch, and those who bless you will be blessed. So again, the prostrating, the bowing down, the serving, I think that's all to be understood in a symbolic kind of way. But certainly it does represent some kind of superiority on some kind of level. But remember, you have to earn it. You have to earn it. You have to deserve it, and I don't want to feel that people are doing this because they feel subjugated, but because they are they appreciate you, and they respect you, and we're talking about deep respect, and they desire to show their love to you. And one of the ways we show love is to serve someone and to be happy about it. So I'm going to pop the place here just to make sure I know where we left off. One moment, and I'll also check and see if there is a Rashi on this. Not finished, of course, with the blessing as yet. But anyway, here we go. Let's take a look. Here, B'nai Imecha, the sons of your mother. Yaakov Amar Lihuda. It's interesting that when Jacob blessed Judah, B'nai Avicha, he said, the sons of your father. The Fishayulo Banim Mikama Imahot. And the reason why is that he had sons from several women, right? Several mothers. The Khan, remember Jacob had more than one wife. The Khan, but here, Shalor Nasa Ela Isha Achat. But remember, Isaac only had one wife, just Rebecca, Amar Pnei Imecha. And for that reason, he said, the sons of your mother. Or Arecha Arur, those who curse you shall be cursed. Mevarachecha Baruch, and those who bless you will be blessed. Uve Bilam hu Omer, and with regards to Bilam, he says, Mevarachecha Baruch, he flips it around, right? He says, may those who bless you be blessed, and those who curse you be cursed, right? So he says, Hatzadikim Tchilatam Yisurim, this is amazing. For the righteous, their beginnings are with adversity. The Sofan Shalva, but their end is with peace, right? Or Rehem, and those who curse them, Umitzarehem, and those who try to give them trouble, called Limavarachehem, and for that reason they precede the ones who bless them. Lefichach Yitzchak Hidim Kilalat Orim, and for that reason Isaac preceded the curse of those who curse, right? Levirchat Mevarchim, to the ones who bless, the blessings of those who bless. V'harishaim, but when it comes to the wicked, Pchilatan Shalva, they start off in peace and prosperity, okay? V'sofan Yisurim, but in the end, they wind up with punishment, tribulation. Lefichach Bilam hikdim bracha lekala, and for this reason, Bilam preceded the blessings to the curses. That's it for today.